Okay, so this morning I want to remind us of our mission, our value, our purpose, whatever term you want to use for it. And we do this every year. We have done this for 20 years or so. I would say this morning isn't comprehensive. If you are interested in finding out a little bit more about Copper Hills, every month Elfie and I host a conversation, casual, relaxed conversation in our home, where you can find out a little bit more about Copper Hills, ask your questions, whatever it would be. There's one coming up a week from Wednesday. If you'd like to be part of that, you can register through our office or on our website. There's limited attendance, or number of seats, number of cushions we have, I guess you could say. But if you want to be part of that, you would be our guest that night. We'd love to have you there. So, as I say, we do this every year. Beginning of every year, we go back through what it is that spurs us on, drives us, is our vision, our purpose, and why we do what we do. The hope would be coming out of it that it would be a reminder to us that have heard it before. And for those of you that didn't know maybe what we were about and what our focus was, that you would go, oh, okay, I get it now. I understand a little more. The purpose of it would be, again, to turn our attention to Jesus, who's the leader of this church. And that would be what we would want. Here's the thing. The vision hasn't changed in 20 years. And it's been tweaked, and we try to think of ways to share it in maybe unique ways or tell stories of how that vision is being fulfilled. But just like this last week, we went for dinner with some couples, and partway through, Elfie thought it was an appropriate time to invite them to come, to attend this weekend. She said, and then she added this, she said, yeah, we're going to talk about our vision, but it's the same thing that we've talked about the last year, every year. For the last 20 years, it never really changes. But come on down, it'd be great. And that's an inspiring invitation right there. So what we've talked about the last 20 years, in simple ways is this: we long to be a genuine and compelling expression of Jesus in our community, in our country, in the world. So what does that mean? Well, I'm going to give you a church word, and if you've been in the church, you've heard this word before. It's from a foreign language, and it comes with all kinds of stuff attached to it, and there's a simple English word or words for it. It's the word gospel, and the real translation into English for that would be the good news. Good news. The good news that you need to know, if you don't, is entirely centered on Jesus Christ, his life and his story of his life, and it's the best news this world has ever received. And I'd like to just kind of summarize it by giving you 4 words that you might remember when you think about good news or the gospel. Here are those 4 words: incarnation, death, resurrection, and kingdom. Very quickly, the incarnation, we just celebrated that, didn't we? God coming into this world, Emmanuel, God with us. So it's God coming to be with us in Jesus Christ. The second word is death. Jesus died for us as a substitute for us, because we've all have this tendency to try to do life on our own or disconnected in some way from God. And every time we do that, that carries with it fatal damage to the relationship with our holy God. And what Jesus did, his death was no ordinary death. It carried with it the power and the authority to take care of that separation that we created, to bridge us back into a relationship with our loving Father. And that's what his death was all about. Resurrection means that he could be alive in us. Jesus coming back to life endorses the power of and the effectiveness of his death. It makes it possible for us to experience life after sin, after wandering from him, forgiven by his death, alive because of his resurrection. And the fourth word is kingdom. Jesus talked a lot about this, and with it he carried the idea that the king was present, not just some future time, but present here now, and that we could be one with him. Jesus' message was that if we rely on his death and resurrection for their intended purposes, that we could do a form of heavenly living in his presence right here, right now, in this moment, and not wait till we die. And this is a moment by moment with God kind of life that we can access. That's kind of the abbreviated edition of what we believe and live as a church family. However, in the last few years, there's been a statement that's kind of risen to the surface. We didn't try to craft this. We didn't go away and ask for divine intervention and a divine, sentence from God that we could summarize this whole thing. It's just somehow came to the surface and it got blurted out one time and then it started to be repeated, and it's just kind of reflects what our thinking as we live out the gospel here. It's this simple sentence: we intend to help each other increasingly think like Jesus so that we are increasingly mistaken for him. Let me unpack that for a little bit. We're going to help each other. This is not a pastor-driven church. It's not an elder-driven church. It's not a ministry leader-driven church. It's us together. We're going to help each other. Our pastors aren't going to do this for us. Our life group leaders aren't going to do this for us. We're going to do this together. We're going to help one another as a community together to do what? Well, to think like Jesus. Well, how in all the world does that happen? And is it even possible? Well, possibly the greatest proponent of this kind of thinking, this kind of idea, other than Jesus himself, was a guy by the name of Paul, who wrote better than half the New Testament. And he would say things like this, as he does in Philippians chapter 2. He says, "Let the mind of Christ dwell in you." Must be possible to think and have motives like Jesus. He says in 1 Corinthians 2, one of my favorite verses, this great promise: you have been given the mind of Christ. You've been given that as a follower of Jesus. Galatians 4, he says, "I agonize for you like a woman in labor, desiring that Christ be fully formed in you." This is all about having our motives aligned with Jesus, because we think, we feel, we experience life with him in a way that it increasingly transforms our thinking to think like him. It comes about and grows as we know Jesus personally and relationally. It's not just an academic exercise, though academics can be part of it. It's the difference between reading a book that a subject matter expert has written and co-authoring a book with the subject matter expert. The biblical idea of mind includes our thinking and our feelings, where our motives come from and our worldview. And we want to help each other think like Jesus. But here's the thing. It's not going to happen all at once. But it ought to be happening increasingly. To be gracious with one another and kind with one another when the pace isn't exactly what ours might be. Or to sign up to be a genuine student of Jesus Christ, to learn from him. To increasingly over time, as we spend more and more time with him. Because you can spend time with him like you can a friend. As we increasingly do that, we increasingly think like him, and it just happens that way. And this would be our hope, that we would be helping one another increasingly think like Jesus. Why? Well, so that we, individually and collectively, we would be mistaken for him. And again, we're never going to be an exact representation of him this side of eternity in our culture, because we are going to struggle with alternative ideas. We're going to struggle with motives that aren't always pure. We're going to struggle with this thing of sin that's reality for us. But again, if we are increasingly thinking like him, it increasingly affects our behavior, increasingly affects our motives, and we increasingly take on the character of the one we spend time with, who shapes us by his Spirit, and we are mistaken for him. But again, not perfectly, but increasingly, helping one another increasingly think like Jesus, so we're increasingly mistaken for him. About 10 years ago or so, before that statement even came to be significant to us, we stumbled across a really amazing story in the scriptures. It had always been there, by the way. It didn't just suddenly mysteriously show up. It had been there all the time. But for some reason, in that season in our world and in our life, this particular story grasped for us the essence of the gospel, or the good news, and became for us something where we said, we want to think like Jesus this way. We want to increasingly, collectively, individually think like Jesus, like this incident reveals how he thinks, so that we would increasingly be aligned with him. Here's the backdrop to it. 10 years ago or so, we had just purchased this property that we're on today. And we were trying to figure out what it is that we would build here to meet our needs. We had been a portable church for so many years, meeting in theaters and cafeterias and multi-purpose rooms and so on. And when finally the opportunity came to own a piece of property and build something on it, the first people we thought of was us. What do we want? What do we need? How do we build something that's going to get us out of that temporary world into a more permanent structure? And then we came across this story, and it reshaped what we did. It reshaped our vision. It reshaped what we focused on and the result of what we ended up building here on this site. So I want to relate that story. It's not new. If you're part of Copper Hills for some time, it's not new to you. But here's what I want to do with the story, the real logical thing. I want to start at the end. I want to tell you how the story finishes so that we might ask, why does it finish like that? So it's taken from John chapter 4, and it's familiar, as I said, so if you can try to suspend your knowledge of this, be surprised, okay? You can try. John 4:39 starts this way. It says, many Samaritans from the village believed in Jesus because the woman had said, he told me everything I ever did. So evidently in this story, there's a woman who encounters Jesus, and that encounter impacts her life in such a way that whatever happened there, she goes and tells her neighbors and friends and people around her what has happened. They in turn are so amazed at her account that they believe that Jesus is the Messiah. Get out of town. Like there's something amazing must have happened here to create that shift in a whole town. When's the last time a whole town got changed by an encounter? In fact, it so impacts the citizens of this town, they go and find Jesus and they make this request of him. In verse 40, it says, when they came out to see him, they begged him to stay in their village. So he changed his plans and he stayed with them for 2 days, long enough for many more to hear his message and actually believe. And then after Jesus leaves, they turn to this woman who started the whole thing, and they say this to her. Then they said to the woman, now we believe, not just because of what you told us, but because we have heard him ourselves. Now we know that he is indeed the Savior of the world. Now it's not written this way, but it's like they turn to her and they say, thank you so much for introducing us to the Messiah. Like whatever happened in your conversation, you came running back to town and you told us about it, and we were convinced because we knew who you were, we knew what you were about, and suddenly there's something different about you, and you're believable, and we're interested as well, and you shared your experience with us, and it's left this impact on our lives now as well. So what was it that created this significant change in thinking in her and her town? What's the rest of the story here? Did Jesus do some great miracle? Did he heal somebody in a profound and amazing way, which he did from time to time? Maybe somebody was raised from life to death. That's convincing. Maybe it was some profound teaching of some kind that impacted life, or maybe he cast the demon out of her. What was it that created this incredible surge in this town? Well, for something just a bit different, I want to read the passage through the lens of a camera. And so take a look at what leads up to this part in John chapter 4. It's such an amazing story how on a typical noonday visit to a well, that this woman could meet Jesus and have her life changed and be so profoundly impacted. Her community and her town are changed. It just never ceases to amaze me. Like we think in these religious, ethereal, mysterious, mystical kinds of terms. This is a real woman on a real day. And Jesus, tired from his walk, has stopped to get refreshed. And what the collision that happens is so amazing and wonderful, and the transformation that occurs as a result of it. I've mentioned the last week or so that Elf and I were in Israel early in December. And we had the privilege of going to Bethlehem on one day. And we visited what's thought as the traditional site where Jesus was born, the Church of the Nativity, 1,700-year-old cathedral, built a stage underneath it as a grotto where tradition says that Jesus was born. A little alcove that, it's so interesting to experience other people's faith in those places. There is some Orthodox Christian clergy that came down, and this is not just visiting another historical site. This is holy ground for them, and the reverence, and it's just amazing how significant that is for them. Then we traveled about 2 miles east of there, and we went to the shepherds area where it's thought traditionally the shepherds were visited by an angel that said, hey, guess what? There's a Messiah born tonight. And just to encounter all that in Bethlehem was really cool. And then we stopped at another place in Bethlehem, a retail store that sells olive wood carvings, along with some other things, but olive wood carvings. And as we walked in, most all of the icons they have and the carvings they have are religious in nature. And as we walked in, I stopped one of the clerks and said, "Hey, is there any chance you have a carving of Jesus meeting the woman at a well?" She says, "Oh yeah, for sure we do." So we did a few things as a whole group, and she got this particular carving. And when I saw it, I said, I want that. I want to buy that because of the significance that this has had for our church as a whole. This unique time of Jesus meeting this woman. There's so much in this story that's so unique. Like the well itself is unique. That well, apparently, we're told, the Old Testament doesn't record this, but in this text, it says, the New Testament, John text says that it was a well that was given from Jacob to Joseph, his son. That means that well is probably well beyond 1,500 years old. And whether Jacob built it and handed it to his son, or he took it over, bought it from someone and handed it, doesn't really matter, but it's about that old. And do you know why that well was made? For water. Like, this is deep stuff. You don't just get this everywhere, right? This is quality teaching right here, okay? It's a well for water. It's not a well for Jesus to meet someone at. It's just for water. Water in an arid ecosystem like ours, we know how vital and essential that is for life, right? To water the crops, water the animals, provide safe, clean drinking water for families. Well, so it was with this, and this is what this well was built for. But when Jesus gets hold of it, when he shows up on the scene, he turns that living water well into an opportunity for living water for her. Only he makes those kinds of offers. And guess what? We offer the same thing. We have the living water. And we have an opportunity to be informers to people of that living water. It's really quite something that we have in our hands. It's an interesting thing what happens to this woman as Jesus talks to her about living water. And then he talks to her about something really personal in her life. Do you ever wonder why he does that? Like, he's invading, isn't he? Isn't it almost in a sense you get, well, Jesus, why are you pointing that out? Like, we don't know exactly why she had 5 husbands. I guess it's possible that all 5 of these guys passed away, but then if that's the case, let's investigate. Something not right there, right? More than likely. The text doesn't say it definitively, but more than likely, these are husbands that divorced her, or she divorced, whichever way it would be. And some of us have been through that heartbreak. Can't imagine that happening 5 times. But for some reason, this is what and now she's living with a guy that's not her husband. And Jesus just dives right into that. Why does he do that? I think Jesus does it in a way that's unique from you and me. See, his heart oozes mercy. As he just lives in the planet of grace. And when he would say it, I think it came across as not condemning. It came across as revealing. And I think there was some sense of freedom in her that this is a unique man. She identifies him as a prophet, not yet as the Messiah. And yet there's that sense that maybe this is a sensitive subject for her, so she tries to change the subject, and he talks about where to worship. Like, what's the right place to worship? The Samaritans had a temple in their region, and the Jews had one in Jerusalem, of course. And there was this contention between these two groups because the Jerusalem Jews thought, well, we're fully of the bloodline of the Jews, and these Samaritans, they kind of got hooked up with Syrians along the way, and they intermarried, and now their offspring aren't pure Jews, and there's this tension that's going on. There's some gender tension probably because, it's actually references that it's not common for a man to ask a woman for a drink. And, maybe there's some moral tension there. But there's something that happens in this woman's life, even as that is there, because Jesus transcends that. That's his mercy and grace. He transcends those barriers. And it's like he turns to her and says, you don't have to be any different. But can I tell you, I know who you are. And I love you. I receive you. My mercy extends to you. And wouldn't you know it, as she changes the subject, And comes to the end, she still doesn't get the living water metaphor. And so Jesus offers her living water, and she still doesn't get it. And then it kind of ends at this point where she says, look, this whole living water thing and this metaphor and where we'll worship and us Samaritans, you Jews, that kind of thing. Guess what? Hey, we can't figure it out. But one day the Messiah is going to come along. He's going to figure it all out for us. And then we're going to get clarity. To which Jesus says, I'm him. I'm the Messiah. That's who I am. And wouldn't you know, at the most inopportune time, Jesus' friends come back from getting lunch in town and they break the conversation. Wouldn't you like to know where that conversation would have gone? Wouldn't that have been interesting? To know, well, okay, so what happened next in the conversation? But we'll never know because it doesn't happen. But I think something happens on that 6 or 7 or 8 minute run back to town. Along the way, I think maybe she's rolling this around in her mind, like, who is it? Could it be? He knows me. He knew stuff about me. How does he know that stuff? He was responded with grace and tenderness. He wanted to, build a friendship without asking me to change my thinking and my ways. It's amazing. What if he is? What if I think he might be. And by the time she gets to town, she knows something she didn't know. That Jesus, in fact, is the Messiah, who knows everything about her and loves her for who she is. Tells all her friends, and they all run out. Because, by the way, they knew who she was. And yet she's so profoundly shaped by this conversation. They go with the little they know from her, and they run out. And the whole town is changed. What a story. It's incredible. And so, as we read the story 10, 12 years ago, and we started to think, well, we want to be like that. What if we thought of what we build here as a well? Like, it'll be for the common good, and our community will come here, not necessarily for religious purposes, but they'll come here because there's something here. There's like water here, like practical, everyday, thirst-quenching water, but maybe in a new way. What would that new way look like? How would we do this? How could we be a well where people would come and then they would meet Jesus in real wonderful ways through our lives as we intersected? So we talked to some of our civic leaders and said, what do you think we should build? What kind of building would our community think of as their building? And actually, the way we raised the funds for the first building was this really clever idea. Like, this is a winner right here, okay? We went to our church family and we said, we want to build a building for the community. Remember, we're a portable church. After so many years, we're looking forward to something. We're going to build a building not for ourselves, but for our community. We're going to be the primary tenant, and we're going to pay for it all. Well, there's a good idea. Except our church family thought it was a good idea. And so we talked about what it would be. Our civic leaders told us this. Don't build another educational institution kind of building. Don't build a sports facility. Don't do that. But here's what isn't available, is opportunities for people to express their artistic interests. Why don't you do something like that? Provide a place where people can come and learn new artistic skills and develop their interests, from theater to music to electronic arts to media arts to all those kinds of arts. Do something like that. So we went to the Arizona Broadway Theater, if you've ever been there. And we took our architect and said, let's build something like that, because we're going to build a building that's a theater, a performing arts center is what we're going to do, which fits well with our needs, but that's going to be our well. We're going to do that. And then we're going to invite our community to take music lessons and to do community theater and whatever other interests they have. And we're going to get the finest quality teachers who love Jesus passionately. And together we're going to do great art. And we're going to rub shoulders with one another, and we're going to represent, and we're going to live out the life of Christ with them in a loving, gracious, merciful way where they don't have to change who they are to be loved by us. We want them to belong before they believe. And this is what we've been about these last 10 years, to do that. And we found some ways to do it. We, early on, the first funds that we raised for this, we said we want to build a real well. So We built a water purification and well in Northwest Africa and funded it and built it on the campus of a Christian school, and there's a church and a variety of things. And we turned to them and said, build this well. I think we've got an image of it. Build this well, but don't tell anybody it's outside money that did it, that you built it for the community so they can come and get fresh water here. That's their water is just filled with waterborne diseases, and come here and you'll get to be with them, handing out water to them, living water, and then living water. See how that works out. And that's what they've been doing for the last 7 or 8 years, doing that very thing. We said another way we can do this is we can build a well in other places in our cities. So in Old Town Peoria, we established a new church, Axiom Church. We planted a new church there with the same vision that we have. And they have built a creative arts venue that they're using to impact their community in wonderful kinds of ways. These are all kinds of expressions of a well. We use this facility currently for these kinds of things. We invite our community to come for movies that we do in the park. Men's and women's ministries of all kinds that are gender specific to reaching out to our community and finding ways that we can do things together. We have this great relationship with a fantastic city, the city of Peoria, where we do some work together. Every year we do a 4-peak challenge where we hike and run the 4 mountains right around us. We do that in cooperation with the city of Peoria. Do you know why we do that? Because we're incredibly fit and we love to make it. Because we want our community to be on this campus so that they can experience us serving them in the name of Jesus, so they'll think highly of Jesus. Because many of them don't think about Jesus at all. Or some, when they do, they think badly of him. And what if they were to intersect our lives like this and run back and go, you'll never believe the love that I experienced at a run. It's just incredible. And this is our hope over and over again, to do that in our community so that we can live out this story in real life every day. We continue to work toward this. This is our passion and this is our interest. There's a bit of a backdrop to this carving. I mentioned the store that we went into. The history of that is in 1967, the Six-Day War, where Israel defeated, I guess you could say, the Arab nations that were, Jordan in particular, that occupied a large chunk of Israel. And Israel secured that and that area. And in 1995, a UN-led peace accord required that Israel remove their military from that particular area around Bethlehem and the West Bank. And it was no longer secured. Well, it was filled with Jewish folks and Orthodox Christians, and the Palestinian Liberation, or the Palestinian Authority, moved in to provide security, which left Jews and Orthodox Christians very vulnerable. And they were afraid for their safety and for their lives. And in a very short order, when that happened in 1995, they kind of fled from parts of the West Bank, in particular Bethlehem. They departed that, and many of them left their homes and their businesses behind. Well, one of the people that fled at that point is the artist that carved this. He came to America and was going to go to school and try to find a new opportunity here in America. And he had some success. And he, creative businessman, along with an artist, he decided to import from Israel, because the olive wood carvings are very popular and very much a part of the economy. And so he ships them to New York, and when he gets them, they're not the highest quality. So he reworks them, recarves them, and makes them more intricate and of better quality, and he sells them. And he finds out he can make some money at this, and it supports his livelihood there. Eventually, he decides he wants to go back to Israel. Via Austria, where he learns some more carving techniques, he ends back in Israel. Guess where he chooses to live? Back in Bethlehem. However, not only did he come back now as an experienced carver, he came back as a follower and lover of Jesus Christ. And it was for that reason that he moves into Bethlehem. because he wants to bring the love of Christ into Bethlehem, into that community. And now he has employed over 40 carvers and other people to come and live in Bethlehem and to impact their neighbors and neighborhoods around them. For non-Arabs, non-Palestinians, it's hard to rent accommodation in Bethlehem, and it's really difficult to buy. So what he does is he helps them rent and helps them buy so that they can move back into Bethlehem and influence that city for the cause of Jesus Christ out of love. And when I heard that story, I go, that's our dream. That's our vision, to be that kind of a people who create a well. See, his shop is a well that's training and growing people and sending them out to have an influence for Christ. And so when I saw this and I heard that story and our own story, I thought, I'm buying that. And I'm taking it home. And we're going to put it up someplace that as we walk by it, as we see it, as we think about the story, we'll be reminded of what our purpose is, why we are here. And it is indeed to represent Jesus, to increasingly think like him. So we are increasingly mistaken for him. Now, Jesus, this is our longing, this is our desire, this is our wish, our hope. We commit ourselves again to be that kind of person. What happened in the story of you meeting that woman, the details are sketchy. We're not sure. We don't know exactly what she thought. You do. But the end of the story is the impact that a single conversation with you can have, where you infuse hope and you infuse opportunity and you infuse forgiveness and you present a pathway forward aligned with the Messiah, a friend of the Messiah. And that is so profoundly transformative for people that no wonder they can't be quiet and they can't not live it out. And we want to be those kinds of people, Jesus, just like you were to that woman. Truth is, for many of us in this room, you've been that to us. And now we would just love to carry that on. And our great joy, Jesus, would be to be spectators to your grace and what you do. Use us, but it's your grace. Work through us, but it's your mercy. And do it all for the fame of your great name, Jesus. Do it for your sake. And this we ask in your name. Amen.